Hello! In this episode, I'm going to be talking to you a bit more about how I chose the plants that are going to go inside of my terrarium. I'm also filming on location at a local botanic garden, and I'm filming here because behind me you can see a massive glass house, and in this glass house they recreated a whole bunch of different habitats and biomes, so they're growing a huge range of plants inside. So you can kind of think of it like flipping through the world's plant catalog looking for things that might suit our needs. And also, it's a glass house, and that's basically a giant terrarium, so should be perfect for finding terrarium plants. So, let's get started. So when you're choosing plants for a terrarium, it's important to think first about what kind of terrarium it is that you want to make. And there's two main types. Basically, you've got open or closed terrariums. In a closed terrarium, it's sealed in some way, so there's a lid on it or something like that. And those terrariums are going to tend to have very high humidity, so you should choose plants that like those kinds of conditions. In an open terrarium, there is no lid, and that means you're going to have a wider range of options because you've got lower humidity levels. So you'll be able to grow more temperate plants. You can also grow rainforest plants, like the ones around me, but you'll probably need to water them or mist them quite a lot more to keep them as moist as they like it.
If you want to grow cacti inside a terrarium, it has to be an open one. And that's because these guys like to have lots of air circulating around. They don't want that moisture to hang around them. An open top is going to allow that moisture to evaporate and leave the container. That's exactly what they do here in this glass house. They've opened the roof here, and that roof keeps rain out off of these plants, so they can control exactly how much water these guys are getting, while the windows above let air circulate through to keep the air nice and dry.
So the second thing you're going to want to consider is where you're going to put your terrarium. You can put them pretty much anywhere except in direct sunlight. That amount of sunlight will quickly raise the temperature in your terrarium, and in a closed terrarium especially, that can turn it into a pressure cooker and you'll cook your plants. So let's get looking at some example plants.
Mosses and liverworts are staples of terrariums because they usually thrive in wet or humid environments, and many are naturally found in dimly lit or shaded areas. They're also generally quite small and will not quickly outgrow small containers, and they come in a huge range of shapes and shades of green. They're suitable for all types of terrarium, particularly small, closed ones which will be kept in dimly lit areas. Look out for a future video focusing on mosses and their relatives. So the next staple group of plants in a terraria are ferns. This is Selaginella, which is actually something that sits in between liverworts and ferns. But it and ferns like this Adiantium, or maidenhair fern, make great plants for any sort of terrarium because they thrive in places where there's high humidity and constantly moist soils. There are loads of different species, so shop around and find one you like, which will be the right size for your container as well. In a terrarium, they are also happy in bright or dark areas. Outdoors, many ferns need some shade or they'll dry out too quickly. This isn't a problem in a terrarium though, where soil, moisture, and humidity will be a lot more constant. Let's look a bit more around the rainforest biome. Now the reason we're looking around the rainforest biome is because these are from the tropics, and that's where you get a really constant temperature through the year, and usually in rainforest there's also really high humidity, and this is exactly the conditions that we'll have inside of a terrarium. Now, most of these plants, while impressive, are too big for a terrarium, so we need to look lower down into the undergrowth to see if we can find some appropriate plants there. So here are some classic terrarium or house plants. There's Phytonia, there's Pilea, and Peperomia. Now, all these plants are understory plants, so they grow right down in the ground, so they can survive in quite dark areas with deep shade. However, they can also be quite brightly colored, and they keep their bright colors if they're able to grow in a brighter spot. There's loads of different varieties and species, so shop around and find one that is going to grow to the size that you want, or that has the leaf size or coloring that you want, because there's lots to choose from. African violets make another potential good choice for a terrarium because they can survive again in quite shady, dark areas. They also don't like being watered from overhead, and in a terrarium, what's happening with the water is it's condensing on the sides of the glass and then dripping down and moistening the soil that way, so you avoid splashing water onto the leaves, which will help them quite a bit. Moving on into a different area of the glass house, here's a part that's filled with carnivorous plants. And these guys make a pretty good choice for a terrarium as well, particularly ones from more tropical areas again. There are more temperate carnivorous plants, and these are the classic Venus flytrap and pitcher plants. And the problem with these is that they need a cold period over the winter. And if you're keeping your terrarium indoors all year round, these plants will potentially die after a year or two if they don't get that cold rest period. Otherwise, though, there's a huge range of tropical carnivorous plants that will really like it inside of a terrarium. Now, they are carnivorous plants, but you don't have to feed them. What you do need to do is give them as bright a position as you can, because in the wild they're used to growing in full sun. So the last group of plants I'm going to talk about that have big potential in terrariums is orchids. Now, orchids have a reputation for being really difficult to kill, and I think that's because most people just treat them like a normal pot plant, but they're not. Most of the orchids we get as houseplants are actually tropical epiphytes. So that means they come from rainforest areas and they naturally grow on tree branches or tree trunks. So they don't get their water from soil. So this is perfect for in a terrarium setting, especially an open one. The open top will allow lots of air to flow around the plant, and just like it would get growing on a tree branch out in the wild. Meanwhile, the walls of the terrarium will still keep it nice and humid for the plant's roots. And because the walls are clear, then you'll be able to see and check and make sure that there's not too much water pooling around the roots, which is really bad. You just want the bark that they use as substrate to be moist, not wet. The other good thing about orchids is that they like bright light, but indirect light. Again, just what you would want to provide for a terrarium.
So I hope you found this video useful. Just remember, before you choose plants for your terrarium, think about what kind of terrarium it is you want to make, an open or a closed one, and think about where it is you're going to put it so you can keep in mind how much light your plants are going to have when you buy them and put them in. Thanks for watching.